Ready? Good morning. I'm Fire Chief Paul Smith with Kentfield Fire District. This is March the 31st, 2015. And good morning. I'd like to share my sincere appreciation to Chief Lellis and Dan White for putting this together today. It's a piece of history that I hope we can all enjoy down the road. I've been with the fire district for 40 years this month. I started as a volunteer in 1975, and in 1975, this American LaFrance, which we're going to talk about today, was out of service. As a matter of fact, it was down the street in a garage, not being cared for and not being maintained at all. The paint had gone, the body had gone, needed a lot of work. In about 1980, the Volunteer Association, along with a number of key fire district personnel, took it upon themselves to build a shelter for it at the back of the fire station and to start restoration efforts. Most of the restoration efforts were completed by Kentfield Fire Department members. It took about 2.5 years, and after the majority of the body work and the motor work was done, we sent it to the California State President in Vacaville for upholstery and paint. So I'll introduce you to the fire engine, and we'll do a little walk around and that. This is a 1927 American LaFrance. It was built in Elmira, New York, and purchased by the Kentfield Fire District, brand new. Was delivered in July of 1928. And I'd like to read just a short passage from the May 18th Board of Fire Commissioners minutes from May 18th, 1928, when they decided to actually purchase this piece of apparatus. The commissioners reported to the members and friends of the fire department present at the meeting that the results of their decision in picking a new piece of fire apparatus. After careful consideration and investigation, the order was placed with the American LaFrance Fire Engine Company for a 500-gallon pumper with accessories as listed, delivered to be made in early July 1928. The total cost, including the pumper, hose, and accessories, to be $9,917.80. Payments to be divided into 5 sums from 1928 to 1933. The choice of the commissioners was met with approval of all present. The secretary was instructed to write to the other companies, thanking them for submitting bids and their interest in demonstrating their various types of apparatus. So back in 27-28, a home could be purchased in Kentfield for about $2,000, $3,000, so it shows you the value of a piece of mechanical apparatus compared to home prices in Marin County at that time. Very interesting. The other companies that were not selected by the Kentfield Board of Commissioners was Mack, Pierce Arrow, and Seagrave. They were all the unsuccessful bidders. This piece of equipment arrived in July of 1928. In the old days, when it was originally outfitted, there was a hose basket behind the fuel tank here, which had about 150 feet of coiled up hardline, and it had about 400 feet of supply line that they would hook to the fire hydrants in the hose bed. At the time, there were less than 50 fire hydrants in town, so having a pressurized water source was a novelty in 1927 in Kentfield, just becoming a vogue. When this pumper was outfitted, it had 3 hard suction lines connected to the fire apparatus and available because their main source of water was from drafting from the Corte Madera Creek or various ponds in town. It came with 2 ladders, a fire extinguisher, a siren, and when it came to Kentfield, the firefighters outfitted it with water cans, and they actually had their their fire coats, their turnout coats, and their helmets hooked onto the other side of the apparatus for use. This is a 6-cylinder inline Buddha engine. Originally came with the apparatus. Very interesting because the standard of the day for fire apparatus was dual ignition. So this has the magneto ignition along with a distributor that had a point set condenser set. In the 1920s, the technology was not good enough yet for the fire apparatus to rely on single source ignition. So they had both were required and both work. The magneto both works, and so does the distributor to distribute the spark to the engine. There's also 2 plugs per cylinder for the magneto and the distributor system. If you take a look here, you can see the water pump to drive the water pump is driven off the motor itself, and the starter is exposed, and so is the ignition system. Very, very simple to operate, very, very simple to maintain. From the factory, this thing was reportedly to develop about 125, 130 horsepower compared to our fire engines of today, which are upwards of 500. But back in the 1920s, this has a 500-gallon per minute positive displacement pump, and that was the power requirement to drive that pump to get that capacity. So this is a rotary gear pump with leather seals. This is the front of the apparatus here. The radiator top and bottom case are cast aluminum. This is a motor meter. It's basically a thermometer that sits in the radiator cap, and when the engine gets warm, the temperature in the thermometer goes up just like the old-fashioned mercury thermometer indicates whether the engine is running or overheating. These did have a tendency back in the day to overheat, so engine temperature was critical. This is a 6-volt electrical system. These lights, the headlights on this vehicle, as well as the spotlight up here, all 6-volt system. It's, I think, better than the candles they used to use or whatever lighting system they had before. The sealed beam, these are non-sealed beam lights, and trying to navigate the dark streets without street lights back in the 20s must have been a challenge. It did come with red lights and siren, 2 red lights in the front, and an amber flashing light in the rear. This also has, in addition to the electric start, like I mentioned before, it has dual ignition system. This also has a hand crank system to crank the engine over in the event of an electric starter failure. Okay, this is the pump panel side of the engine. In today's world, most of the pump panels on modern fire apparatus in the United States are on the driver's side. The discharges in the suction for this apparatus are over here, along with the pressure gauges. There's a compound gauge that basically said how much water you had coming in, and a discharge gauge that monitored your pressure on the pressure side of the pump. The valves are up here to operate and flow water, and this lever right here is to take the transmission and shift it from the road gear into the pump gear to drive the pump. So the operation would be the operator of the engine would stop and park the piece of apparatus, set the brakes, set the wheel chocks, put the transmission into neutral, switch the transmission into pump gear, and engage the fire pump. When this apparatus was restored in the 1980s, like I mentioned before, the members of the Association of Firefighters did most of the body work and the rust removal and the repairs, and it was sent to the California Correctional Facility at Vacaville for paint. When it came back to Kentfield, the upholstery had been done there, and all the red paint was done there, and a local artist did the lettering and the gold leaf that you see embellishing the hood, the fenders, and in that. The back of the apparatus shows a oak hose bed and 2 rear stoplights with a well underneath it, and the underneath well was where they had another booster line stored down there. That tank in the middle of the bed there is about a 125 gallon water tank. I believe it was an accessory added in the 1940s and the 1950s in-house by the department. Now in the day they would put 8, 10, 12 people on this piece of apparatus to respond to calls. And in the 70s, when I started here, the old timers recalled that they had a fire up on Stetson, which is a hill that runs up and back of the fire station, very steep uphill grade, and they had 10 or 12 people on this piece of apparatus. So many people in the back that they lost the control of steering because with the grade, the front end lifted from the roadway. It must have been quite a deal, quite an experience. It's interesting to supply this little hose bed that was in the back. There was some maybe 50 or 100 feet of booster line hose in here. What they did is they put the pump into gear, and this nickel railing here is hollow. So the water would come from the pump on the tank up in the front of the apparatus, be pumped through this hollow rail, and it had a connection that came out of here, a flexible connection that went into this area right here to supply the hose bed. Pretty ingenious for the 1920s, I think. Okay, this is the working controls of the 1927 LaFrance. You had a clutch pedal and a brake pedal. The clutch pedal disengaged and engaged the clutch. This is a 3-speed, 3 forward gears and 1 reverse gear, non-synchro mesh transmission. In order to start this thing, this lever right up here was engaged, and there's an indicator whether you're on off, magneto, battery, or both. So in order to start it, for the most effective start, the operator would flip the lever into both, igniting both the magneto and the distributor. There's also a throttle advance and a spark advance to start. So the lever on the spark advance would move forward to the start position as it would with the throttle. You advance the throttle to the run to the idle position, and hopefully electrically start this and not have to use your hand crank. In order to engage the transmission, the operator would put his foot down on the clutch pedal, shift the transmission into first gear, and slowly release the clutch pedal while advancing the throttle. The only piece of equipment that I know on this dashboard that is not original is the odometer. The odometer and speed indicator was broken in the 1970s when I was here, and they sent it back to a repair facility, actually a gentleman back east in Minnesota that did repairs on this type of equipment and was able to refurbish it for us and send it back. I think the cost at the time was a couple of $100 to refurbish the speedometer, odometer assembly.